Shalom Aleichem. Let's learn the Sikh of Emor base, but we're going to do something a bit different, and that is the whole Sikh is based on the assumption that we know what Chadash is. I really didn't know what Chadash is, and I'd imagine we could all gain from getting some context. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some sharing some information. A lot of it is from an article that Rabbi Monshine wrote, which is on shulchanarcharav.com. The Torah tells us that you're not allowed to eat from grains until after Pesach. In other words, anything that's planted in the previous 12 months and is cut, you cannot eat it until after the Pesach. So in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, the moment you were makriv the Korban Omer on Tezayin Nisan or Chutz La'aretz, what we would call Yudzayin Nisan, because it's 2 days of Yom Tov Shem Golis, from then you were able to eat anything from the last 12 months that was planted and cut. If something was planted 3 days before Pesach and it was nishtash b'karka, it was already fully grown within the land, then that's part of the previous season, and everything that happens after that will only then be allowed in the coming year. Now, if you live in Eretz Yisrael, it's not an issue because you're planting in the previous year, you're cutting right after Pesach, so the food was all planted, the grain was all planted, you're cutting it now, Mazel Tov. The issue is what happens when you're cutting and planting at different times of the year. So for example, in certain parts of Russia and Poland, etc., they were only cutting 6 months later in autumn. So that means they would now have to wait 6 months until the next Pesach, until they're allowed to eat the fruits. Eat the grain, and there's issues with the United States and England, etc. Now, this affected the behavior, and that's what Alter Rebbe writes in Shulchan Aruch, the Achshav, and now the world is not Nizhar and Isser Chadash, and some people are Melamed Schus, some people give them, in other words, a Melamed Schus, and give them a merit. Now, it says that even in places where you were able to eat it and keep it, it was easier. Like Poland, certain parts of Poland, nevertheless, most of the people are not keeping Yisur Chodesh and will Melamed Schus on them. Because the main drink was made from beer, which came from those grains, and they were saimech on and basically they wanted to drink it and they couldn't wait, so therefore they would rely on the opinion of some of the Rabbi Seinu that Chadash in outside of Eretz Yisrael is only midrabanan, and the Chachamim were only geyser on places next to Eretz Yisrael. And some people were melamed schus that they believe that Chadash is only by tvua, by grain, which it belongs to a yid while it's being cut, not if it belongs to a goy. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues, Kol Bal Nefesh, anyone who's whatever, taking, the Yiddishkeit more seriously, should not rely on this matirim and should be machmir as much as possible, like most of the Rishonim and Achronim hold, that Chadash Noeg Min HaTorah, even the Chutz La'aretz, and even Mishal Goyim, Kichein Eker, that's the main opinion. Now, the fact is that we see that the Chassidim were dafka mekel, were lenient with Chadash. Now, we have to explore what actually is going on. The Tzemach Tzedek has a huge tshuva about Chadash, and he's quite harsh because the most famous mekel, the person who is the most lenient, is the Bach, and the Tzemach Tzedek writes quite harshly. Ein divrei habach v'ashev Yaakov's nechonim. The words are not correct. And then he writes, I heard from my great uncle, the brother of the Alter Rebbe, Ma'aril from Yanovich, that the Alter Rebbe gave a reason to explain, to settle the reason that some people are mekel. But nevertheless, he says, Vadei shekol yirei shamayim yachmer la'atzmai, because it's asur midoraisa, no difference a yid and not a yid. Now, the fact is that the Tzemach Tzedek didn't actually complain about the fact that people are taking things out of Chadash. And truth is, we see they even made a shtar mechira to sell it to a goy. that he allowed people to sell the grain to a guy, so that takes away the issue of the Bach. Sorry, takes the issue of Chadash that belongs to a Yid. Now, the truth is the Bach was never Mechadash. He didn't initiate the heter of Chadash. He was only coming to be Melamed Zchus, and the fact is that's what people were doing. He said like this: Haminik Pashat Malchusena, the custom is simple and accepted in our kingdom, the kingdom of Poland, to be matir. And even the Gdolei Torah before us, they weren't oyser, and they drink the beer that was made from the Tvua, besides a few Chassidim that are staying away. We're obviously talking about before Chassidim of the Baal Shem Tov, different, like the Chassidim, in other words, the Yerei Shamayim. But after looking into it, you could see that it's mutter midina from halacha, and therefore nobody should say that it's aser hepech haminik shenagu al pi Gdolei Yisrael heter. Whoever wants to be machmir, but it's not aser. Very few people accepted the divrei Bach, the words of Bach, without complaining. But the fact is, it's the Bach. So much so that the Alter Rebbe writes, the Olam is not Nizar and Nisr Chadash. And the Rebbe actually wrote, the Rebbe said on the Sikh of Achron Shal Pesach Tavshin Mem, in the unedited, the Rebbe says that if there's somebody who's Nizar and Chadash, Tavei la Bercha, but we don't know of people like that, and if there was, we would definitely know about it. So, it's just, I'm going to share with you a few interesting points that he brings about. It's quite fascinating. We see a lot of the Gdolei Yisrael that accepted the words of the Bach. But I just wanted to share with you something that I just saw an unbelievable in the article. It says that in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, that when the Bach passed away, they cooled off Gehenna for him. What does that mean? So the Baal Shem Tov says they cooled it off the whole Gehenna for 30 or 40 days, and the Baal Shem Tov said, and the Tzemach Tzedek said for 60 days. And the Tzemach Tzedek explains why. He says all tzaddikim have to go through Gehenna. Now, interesting, how do we know what happened with the Bach when he went up to Shamayim? So one of the descendants of the Bach, his name was the Befal Meislish, he wrote a Sefer Teis V'Shabbos. The Sefer was written 250 years ago. And he says, the Batim, the Bais Chodesh, who wrote many Sfarim about Batim, about houses, is known that when he went up to Shamayim, they said, open up space for the B'yoyel Mikroke Habira, the capital. And this was revealed to us by a certain spirit that was talking to us, I don't know, Dibuk, the way it was. So we see that over here, this is a little bit of the kavod of the Bach, and that they said, well, make path. And then the other thing is that we see that we called off the Gehenim like the Baal Shem Tov and the Tzemach Tzedek see. Now, there's a connection between the Chadash and the fact that they cooled off Gehenim. That received the tradition, and it says this in the Sefer Teis V'Shabbos, that the reason they gave him such a kavod when he came up to Shamayim is because of the Heter Chadash. Now, interesting, there's another Sefer, Sifron Shel Tzadikim, that says in the name of the Pinchas V'Karetz that they cooled off Gehenna before the Bach came 40 days. In other words, before he came, not once he came, but so that the Bach can sit in Gehenna, but it wouldn't be too bad. But in other words, according to this opinion, Gehenna, the cooling of Gehenna is not what happened because of Heter, but rather the fact that he went to Gehenna is because he gave the Heter. So there's different nuschos. So yeah, he goes into a whole different nuschos about neshamas in Gehenna, in Gan Eden, etc. So he says there's an interesting tradition from the Ruzhiner about the drashas that the Bach gives. It says like this: the Baruch of Skver shared that in the name of somebody else that the Bach swore that when he comes to the Olam Elyon he won't go into Gan Eden until the Gula Shlema will happen. when he passed away. They took him to Gan Eden. He forgot about it. But as he was walking one step in the Gan Eden, he remembered. So he stood with one leg in Gan Eden, the other one out of Gan Eden. And the Bach was a Greisa Darshan, so he started saying drashas, a very geschmack drasha. And a lot of neshamas came to him. And he is, till today, he's saying drashas over there. I would encourage you to read this article. It's fascinating. You can reach out to me at levi@gmail.com and I'll try to send you this article, which is just so interesting.